Pat Summitt. And Pat Summitt hired 50 years ago. John, would it be this month, this year, the date?
Well, it was before the season, but I think it was maybe December 7th when she coached her first game at Tennessee, which she lost. I think it might have been to Mercer. Uh, yeah, but it was 50 years ago when she started her program, the Lady Vols basketball program. And she was just a year or two older, a few years older than her players. She was in her early 20s.
Incredible story. And I will just ask you this broad scope question. Where is women's basketball right now without Pat Summitt? Because it's getting views. Even the WNBA that we've made fun of before, John, is getting views. And obviously college basketball has been something for at least half of those 50 years since she was hired. But she was the primary driver behind that. Would you agree?
Yeah, she was. She did it, and she was mindful of that. She wasn't just trying to promote her sport. She was trying to promote, uh, the not just Tennessee basketball, but women's basketball overall. So she did have a huge impact on that. Um, I think it would be interesting if she had not contracted early onset dementia. She would still be coaching now. There's not a doubt in my mind.
Wow.
She would have probably coached till she's in her late 70s or longer. Um, and I think she would have been even better in this era because of name, image, and likeness, and because of transfers. She would have pulled in players. I mean, she had connections all over the country. She's got $25,000 to speak to corporations. So who wouldn't have wanted to align themselves with Pat Summitt and her brand and have her brand as part of your brand? So I think you would have invested in her. People would have invested in her. NIL money would have been invested in her program. So she would have maintained a dynasty. The dynasty would have actually been enhanced. I think she would have won several more national titles.
That's a great point. Caleb?
John, do you think part of what about from an X's and O's standpoint? Do you think Pat Summitt would have embraced, because she was all about defense and rebounding and pounding it inside, do you think she would have embraced the level of spacing that has almost become required today in women's basketball if you're going to win?
Yeah, I think she would have embraced whatever she needed to embrace to be successful. I think she was that kind of coach. She changed as the game evolved. She wasn't as much of a taskmaster in her final seasons as she was in her first. I mean, she used but in terms of, I didn't think of her as being, say, as good of an offensive coach as Gino Auriemma at UConn is. I think he's a preeminent offensive coach in women's basketball. Uh, but I think she would have adjusted. What she would have done is she would have brought in so much talent, and she did that with her unbeaten national championship team '98. That team was just so talented. It was ahead of its time in terms of women's college basketball. So much talent on it. Two of the greatest women players in Chamique Holtzclaw and Tamika Catchings. And that team was very good offensively as well as defensively. So I see what your point is. The game has evolved, but she would evolve with it. And the thing is, I don't think anybody in this era, in the NIL era, with Tennessee resources, had some of the personality and her ability to market, promote, and her ability with media relations. I think she would have been at the very top again.
I want to, I'm not like I'm not trying to be doctor who diagnoses people or anything like that, but I mean there are great stories out and research out about how an excess level of stress and overwork can lead to early onset dementia when you're doing it in your 20s. And I know that when Pat Summitt, I've read stories, John, I know you were covering them in the 80s, where She went way beyond the regular work that coaches are supposed to do when they run a program in her 20s. And what I'm talking about, I mean, they didn't have a team manager. She watched the jerseys for the players a lot of times. How overworked would you say Pat Summitt was in her when she was taking over the program trying to build it in the 70s and the 80s?
Well, yeah, I'm sure she was very overworked because, as you pointed out, she was doing everything. And if that's a factor, uh, a lot of people, if that's a factor in contracting dementia, a lot of people, type A personalities who are driven to succeed, who don't sleep much, who work really hard, who are stressed out a lot. Maybe, yeah, you could say that. But see, also there's some people that thrive on that. And I think she thrived on it. I don't think she was stressed. There's a difference in working a lot of hours and being stressed. I don't think she was ever stressed because she was so into what she was doing. She so enjoyed what she was doing. And I've been around her. I guess 1999, I accompanied her and her team on a European tour. It was a tough job for me, traveling through Europe and writing a column at the end of each day with no real deadline and staying in really nice hotels and eating really expensive food. Probably somebody got laid off because of that junket, but that's not my concern. I had a job to do and I did it as best I could. But I just remember Pat was so good at multitasking. And even in the heat of battle, I just never thought of her as being stressed. I just thought of her thriving on that kind of work. And yeah, she did work a lot of hours, but she really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Caleb, I'm not sure how much interaction you had with her, but I like to share this one story is just how kind of smooth she was, John. Yes, when she walked into a room, it was intimidating. I don't care if you were man, woman, whatever. It was like she had a presence. But she also, we were doing a show called the New Sentinel Sports Page. It was pretty successful. And Mike Griffith and I were doing a show together, and she was recording some stuff for the Ball Network. And I just said, "Oh, hey, Pat, would you care to jump in here and join us for a second?" Let's forget about the fact that Mike Griffith completely stumbled over every word and was scared to death of Pat Summitt. But let's focus on the fact that she just took it in stride and she bounced on the radio, did an extra interview, and promoted her program. It probably took, walking in and out of the studio, the 10-minute interview took her 11 minutes, but that added to what she had to think about and do that day. And she handled it and just with perfect grace and stride. It was like it was nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would have been very stressed, very anxious being interviewed by you based on your reputation, Dave. But I don't think she would have been. I'm kidding. Uh, but she was you're right, Dave. She was very smooth. That came easily to her. She was so good with people. And that's one of the things I wrote about. When you were in her presence and you were talking to her one on one, nothing else existed. She wasn't thinking about some kind of some recruit she had to talk to that day. She wasn't thinking about a game plan. She was always very much in the presence, and that had a lot to do with her success.
Yeah, it was interesting watching her do the individual television shots. John, I'm sure you remember this. After practice, you give the real stuff to kind of the real journalist, and then you go to the TV people. And really, they could have all done it in a group setting, but she would go to each individual one so they could get their mic flag up there. But she thought it was that important. And I just always thought that the way she locked in and did those 90 seconds or however long it was like
Sure.
she said the same thing, but it sounded like it was the first time you heard it.
I know that's the talent. But again, the main thing is anybody that met her and talked to her was blown away. She remembered. She remembered conversations. She remembered names. But one of the reasons she was able to do that so easily was because she was in the present. She wasn't thinking about something else while she was doing that.
And I will offer this up too, that my wife has met every football coach that's been at Tennessee. Well, not the recent Dodo Birds, but most every football coach that's been at Tennessee, and basketball coach as well. And she only like stumbled over her words with Pat Summitt of all the coaches she met. I was like,
Did she get to meet Philip Fulmer?
yeah, I think she took a couple phone calls from Philip Fulmer at one point.
Oh,
So
that's great.
that's a whole different story for another day.